Hey, RV Renovation Nation. Welcome to the New Look RV Renovation Podcast,
where we want to empower and entertain RV renovators with relevant information, ideas, and stories.
We're your hosts. I'm April.
And I'm Derek. If you're enjoying listening to this podcast, please make sure to subscribe and find us on YouTube.
On this episode, we sit down and talk with Carrie and David of Revamping Camping.
Before launching their RV renovation business, both of these guys worked at an RV dealership.
So they have an extensive base of knowledge and experience on servicing and maintaining RVs that most renovators do not.
And this is important stuff for anybody with an RV, and it's a great reminder to all of us renovators that it isn't just the pretty stuff that matters.
They cover some great tips on inspecting an RV before purchase.
And they also talk about the ways that you should be maintaining your RV.
And discuss some great upgrades they've made in their renovations.
Like a tankless water heater.
Ooh, I need one of those.
So get ready to learn because these guys are full of knowledge.
Well, welcome David and Carrie from Revamping Camping to the podcast.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you. We're excited.
And where are you guys at? Just to let everybody know.
We're in Murfreesboro, Tennessee, which is just about 30 minutes south of Nashville.
Can you explain, what is Revamping Camping? What do you guys do?
Well, we renovate campers. We have been renting campers as well, although we decided last fall to sell the two that we had renovated to rent out. And then we were going to buy two smaller ones in the spring. So hopefully we wouldn't have to deliver as much. Last year we ended up delivering constantly, and it would take 2 days out of our week. By the time you drive 2 hours to a campground, set it up, 2 hours back home, the cleaning process took forever. And so we were hoping, well, maybe if we buy smaller, like little minis, 22-foot campers, then people with SUVs could carry them. That was kind of the plan. We also do winterizations. He does service calls for people.
And so have you guys found these 22-foot campers yet? Like the smaller ones that you want to use?
Well, we found some. But our trip to Key Largo to work for that 2 to 3 weeks kind of put our schedule off. And then the client contacted us while we were there saying, hey, I'm selling my house in a month. I want you to renovate a camper for us. So I said, okay, well, we'll put the Salem, which we had already started, we'd put it on hold to go to Keys. And so then we put it on hold to do this client. And so then we had another client reach out to us, and they had their camper shipped to us, and we had to do it when we finished with the Silverback.
Oh my gosh. You guys are busy.
It happened really quickly, and it's probably good for us because it's lined up work in advance, and we're not as stressed about making sure that we have something done. We have it waiting for us.
Right.
Yeah. And personally, I like the renovation process better than the rental process. So
it works out. It's a win-win.
Yeah.
And we know you guys both have a backstory of working in the RV industry previous to Revamping Camping. Can you guys kind of touch on that?
Growing up, I didn't go camping. My parents didn't really want anything to do with it. We had a farm, which kind of tied us down because of the animals. And so they didn't like going on trips. Once I started dating her parents, took us camping. We went with her siblings. We started going places, and we started out tent camping a lot. Her parents had a camper, but we were in a tent, and it kind of opened my eyes to, oh wow, this is really fun. I enjoy this. I love being outside. So it was kind of something that I fell in love with immediately, and eventually we did get a camper. But to get into the business side, that was a lot later. We have some friends that owned a dealership, and I was at a job that I was content with. I wasn't looking for a job, and I suddenly had several job offers just pop up, and I had told my friend that I was considering them. I was like, it's kind of intriguing to have these options. And he said, well, if you're going to be changing jobs, let me throw this into the ring here for you as an option. Eventually I came around to it, and I took the leap. And so I started out working at Candy's Campers as a service tech, and predominantly when I first started, I was doing PDIs, which are pre-delivery inspections. So when they would get new units in from the factory, they had to be gone through, make sure everything works, find any problems initially and fix them before a customer bought it. So that really helped me get familiar with how everything on a camper works. And In between those, I was working on problems that customers were bringing their campers in. They had a couple of other techs that taught me a lot. And so I was kind of learning on the go. And then after a year there, he promoted me to service manager because he just had a lot of issues with how the shop was being run. He needed somebody he could trust. And I had experience as a supervisor in my previous job. They had campers all over the lot that they didn't even know who belonged to. The filing system was literally just cabinets where they just threw paperwork into, and it was in no particular order. They didn't have a clue where money was going in or coming out. So it was a complete mess, and
That's where I came in.
I was completely overwhelmed.
So I said, well, let me just come in a couple days a week, and start helping out, and ended up doing warranty, ended up learning how to do parts. And then there was no service writer at that time either. So I kind of became the service writer, created a color-coded file system for all the customer files and like all these guidelines on this is how this process should work. And ended up being there 3.5 years.
Sounds like you were their savior.
Absolutely. I wouldn't have been able to survive without her. It was
What a find for your buddy.
Yeah, that's true.
ultimately they wanted to eventually work it up to where they could sell it. And so that was kind of in the back of our mind the whole time. We knew that was a potential possibility. The October before COVID hit, they sold to Family RV, and we had mixed feelings because we loved working for them. They were wonderful bosses to us, and our friendship is still wonderful. So everything came out good there. But then when COVID hit, everything changed.
First, we were furloughed when COVID hit.
Yeah.
And then about 3 or 4 weeks after that, then they just laid us off. And I think they only had like 3 employees at that time.
Yeah.
And then when it ramped back up, of course, the camping industry, probably May or whatever started ramping back up, then they had switched over to the more sales oriented. And at that point, we were already doing our own thing. So we had already decided, hey, even if they want us back, I don't think that we're going to go.
I hadn't planned to do it long term, and she kind of had to convince me, let's take this leap together. Let's do this. And I'm really glad she did. And she has more long-term vision with things like that than I do. It makes a good team.
No, and that's important to have one another, and to be able to navigate also just a relationship while working together is never an easy task. So you work together in more of a company setting prior to that, and now you're working together as entrepreneurs. Have you found differences or contrasts there in those 2 instances?
Well, it's funny because initially we kind of had our own workspaces, and then they remodeled the offices at the dealership, and she ended up moving into my office. So we worked very close together.
It was a little 10 by 10 like closet, and his desk was on my side and mine was on the other
I wasn't
side.
sure our marriage was going to survive.
But we still enjoyed working together.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. We could get past that. And at the end of the day, we had a rule, we're not talking about work. And I think that was very healthy for our relationship.
Yeah. We did have to make that rule.
Yeah. Because initially she would come home and want to talk about it. And I was like, I'm done. No.
But now I feel like it's a lot better because we're working for ourselves towards the same goal. We're not working to make someone else's business successful. We're working to make our business successful. And if we want to sleep in, we sleep in. If we want to start working at 12, we do that. If we want to go camping, we can whenever we want, so that aspect, it's much better.
And David, going back to your time at the dealership and some of those early days too, what does it take to be a tech? Is there like some level of certification or education, or is it just learn on the go?
Well, there are a lot of classes that you can take to work towards a certification, and they kept trying to get our shop certified. We had a lot of techs that would start the process and never finish it, myself included, because there just wasn't time for me to set aside to do that. I have all the books. I've studied them. I took a lot of classes at RV trade shows. The industry has made more opportunities available. I haven't really worried about getting certified since I left. Um, it's
But there's a very big lack of RV technicians. So
Absolutely.
even where we worked, the turnover for technicians was horrible.
Yeah.
And getting technicians that were qualified to, someone comes in and their refrigerator doesn't work or their AC doesn't work or these major appliances, and not having a technician that could just, be able to instantly figure it out was a constant problem. Most of what we learned was just on the job and, figuring out. And a lot of times you'd have the same issue over and over again. So once you figured it out once or twice, then the next time it happened, you were just like, oh, that's what that is. You're just like, yeah, that's more than likely this is it.
Well, it seems like you have a lot of great insight from those days at the dealership. Just kind of seeing RVs coming in and out. What would you recommend, or what do you think are some of the ways that people can give their RV longevity?
People don't really understand. You're supposed to inspect your roof seals every 3 to 6 months, and it's printed in the owner's manual when you get your camper. But a lot of people don't know that. We didn't know that when we bought our first 2 campers. We didn't know you're supposed to get up on the roof every 6 months and check the seals. And so
We learned
you
the hard
have,
way.
yeah, you have, a camper that's a year or 2 old even, and you have rotten front caps, the rippling and the bubbling you see in the front caps, that's
Is that
what,
delamination?
yeah,
Yeah.
it's delamination from that front seal. And our dealership was a Keystone only dealership. So
Okay.
most of our knowledge on the newer units are going to be Keystone. We serviced every unit except pop-ups. We did not work on pop-ups. And we didn't do motorized either. So it was only travel trailers and fifth wheels. But yeah, maintenance is key.
What does that mean? What does the maintenance mean?
Sealing is probably the most important thing that we saw. Like she said, if you're not sealing the roof and the water starts getting in, it's usually too late by the time you realize there's a big problem, because it's been seeping through the walls, it gets in the floor, and by the time that wood gets soft, or the styrofoam, or whatever it's made out of, then you have a major issue. But that was probably the biggest problem that we saw. Keeping it under a shelter seems to be something that really makes a camper last longer, just because it's not in the elements. And we've noticed that when you have a camper that's out in the weather, the decals start coming, they start cracking, the tires dry rot faster, the roof starts getting that dusty, chalky feeling to them. But then you would see one that has been in a shelter, a garage or something, and it comes in and it still looks brand new, and it's 6-7 years old. So I'd say that's probably a good thing. If you can keep it in a shelter, that would be helpful and beneficial.
For somebody that doesn't understand what you mean by sealing, can you just unpack that just a touch?
Yeah. So on the roof, all of the openings that go through the rubber membrane. So you have your AC, which has a gasket around it, but then you have your vents that open, you have your plumbing vents,
Antenna.
So anything that comes through that rubber membrane has to have a sealant around it. So where they attach something, it's going to have screws. There's usually butyl tape between whatever that object is and the rubber, but it still needs a little bit more. So they put lap sealant around that. They seal around the gutter tracks where it overlaps the sides.
And the mistake a lot of people make is they don't use the right sealant. So you can't go to Lowe's or Home Depot and buy a tube of weatherproof caulk and put it on your rubber roof.
The silicone that you would get at Home Depot does not bond to that rubber very well. And I didn't know that when we first, like she said, we learned the hard way, because we thought, oh, well, this says you can use to seal whatever. And I would put it up there, and I thought we were good, and then we'd have water in there. And when I started working at the dealership, I brought it up there, and one of the techs was like, I'll show you why it's leaking. And he took the edge of that silicone and just pulled up, and the whole thing just peeled off like it wasn't even attached. And that was very eye-opening to me. And so you have to use something that will bond to the rubber. The product that we always used there was made by Dicor, but it's just a lap sealant that you put on with a caulk gun around all of those openings. But if you're up there and you see cracks developing in it, that's a good time to go ahead and touch it up. And you don't have to do every square inch of it. You just touch it up where you're needed.
For some of our listeners who may not have ever even looked at their RV roof or an RV roof, what David and Carrie are talking about is if you look at the top, you'll see kind of like this gummy caulk. Like it's very thick. It's usually not clean and pretty, even out of the factory. And it's just around all those areas where there would be an opening in, like they said, in the roof. When you're going about inspecting that, like you said, you're just, if it's a rig that's not brand new out of the factory, you're just looking for just little cracks or little openings, little holes, and that's how you'd recommend touching that up.
A lot of times you'll see screw heads start breaking through the surface of that, or you'll see a crack develop.
Kind of feathering, kind of like dry rotted tires.
Where it
You'll
starts
see a little
separating.
bit of, yeah.
And it's vital to touch that up very regularly. We recommend 3 to 6, just as the manufacturer warranties, and pretty much all of them probably say that.
Yeah, going down the road, it's not like a house. Your house sits here, your camper goes down the road 70, 80 miles an hour. You hit a pothole, things move. You
guys drive fast.
We have a 3500. Yeah. It'll pull.
But it's, as our boss used to say, it's like going down the road and having a little earthquake. It's
true.
And the way they build them is not necessarily the greatest standards anyway. So it does require some maintenance just to keep it in good shape. And that's probably the biggest thing that people neglect. And I always hated seeing that, because people have spent sometimes their life savings to get their dream camper, and they don't understand that aspect of it. And then all of a sudden they're having to repair it, and it's only a year or two old. And that always broke our heart, because it's devastating to people.
Yeah. Well, another reason why people should inspect their roof is because those low-hanging tree branches, you have especially with fifth wheels, they're so tall, and you drive through a lot of state parks, and those trees will rip holes, right down the edge of your roof. And if you don't get up there and look at it, then, a couple months after your trip, you could have some major water damage.
Yeah.
And people might look at, purchasing something like Dicor and be like, oh my gosh, this stuff is expensive. But in the big picture, it's definitely worth the investment.
Oh,
right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Because, you might be used to spending $2 or $3 for a tube of, silicone or caulk or whatever. But, like you said, that stuff doesn't hold up in this sort of situation.
Yeah.
Were you guys seeing a lot of RVs coming into the dealership that were not properly maintained?
Pretty much most of them.
Yeah, yeah. We were thinking probably only about 10% of the campers are properly maintained.
Oh wow.
Yeah, it's eye-opening, and that's something that's helped us as we've started this business, because when we go to look for them, we know that there's problems with most of the campers. And I mean, some people are probably thinking, no, there's no way that there's that many, but we started thinking about it, like how many came in that didn't have issues like that, and it's very, very few. And that's why so many people are buying campers, and they start renovating them and discover problems that are hidden, and it's because people haven't caught all those issues. And sometimes you can do your best and still miss something, because it doesn't take much for water to find a way into the camper, but that is probably the number one thing that happens to campers over long term is water damage.
Carrie, you started to talk about sidewalls. So we kind of covered the roof here. What are some of the other suspect areas?
So where the roof folds over, the transition on the sidewalls, that area needs to be caulked. We saw some brand new units at the dealership where the factory did not screw the roof decking all the way down. And so the roof decking would pull up on the rubber, separate the trim that's on that metal transition on each side.
Is that like the gutter area, like that little track? Okay, right. So below that, you're saying, or right above it? Right above it.
Above it. So the roof folds over, and then the track sits on it like that. And then right there will be, usually they use clear non-sag Dicor lap sealant. So that area, if that cracks at all, you've got water just going straight down the sidewall to the floor. And then the metal transition where on the fiberglass campers where the floor line meets right there, that area also needs to be sealed. On fifth wheels, the bulkhead part, so the part that kind of curves down like that, that area has to stay sealed. So it's basically anywhere where you see metal trim on the camper, it has to be sealed.
Now, it's a little different on the sides than it is on the roof because you can use a silicone-based product on the sides. It does bond to the Phylon, but it's hit or miss. We've had some products that weren't very good. They didn't last very long. ProFlex is one that we do recommend. We like using that, but it's not the same stuff you would use on the roof, just to be clear on that.
Yeah. So even on the units that have slide outs, so where the slide out gasket attaches to the sidewall and to the roof line, there's even sealant there as well. So even those areas have to be checked and sealed regularly.
And the ones going up and down and horizontal, both of those.
Yes.
And while she's mentioning slide out seals, that's another thing that can be a leak area. You know, if those seals are not making good contact, if the slide out's out of adjustment, or if the seals are weathered, or if they're torn, anything like that, it's good to check those regularly just to make sure that it's sealing properly.
How would somebody assess that?
Well, look for any physical damage, and then another way is when the slide is all the way in. If you go to the outside, you want to make sure you can't get your fingers in between the slide out fascia and the side of the camper. You should have, just enough to maybe get your fingertip, but not slide your whole hand in there, because you want that compressed. You want the bulb seal to be squished to where it's not letting anything through. And then you can do the same thing when the slide is out on the inside. You want to make sure that there's not a gap between that seal and the wall. And if there is, then something is out of adjustment. And we see people that are living in them a lot of times, if that happens over time where it's out of adjustment and that water gets in, it will tend to rot the walls right next to the slide out or the floor around the corners. So if you start noticing that would be the first place I would look, just to make sure that it is tight.
That's one reason why we do recommend slide out toppers. So if you install a slide topper on top of your slide, it protects the roof of the slide out from like pine cones and pine needles. And people don't realize they have a slide out and they're camping in the woods and they get pine cones and then they pull the slide in and then that rips the gasket right there. And so then water will just come in. So
you have two kinds of seals there. You have the wiper seal, which is the flap that kind of goes with the slide out, whether you're going in or out, and then the bulb seal, which is more rounded. So they each serve their own purpose, but they're both crucial to keeping water out.
And we've found that the seal right around the slide floors too, on the exterior, that little gap, especially in the corner on the sides, on a lot of units, that's where, when we've inspected and we found water damage. Do you have any recommendations with that one, or again, it's just a little bit of caulk?
They're all a little different. So in my opinion, it would be just a case by case, but yes, you can use caulk there, silicone, to seal that if it is a problem.
Typically though, I think that comes from, some people don't realize that you have to have the slide all the way in or all the way out. If you partially leave it in or out, the rain's just going to come right in. So that, or if it's out of adjustment slightly, then that causes that.
Just seems like there's this little, the ones that we've discovered, and one of them we worked on, and this is one of the reasons that we're personally, a task to avoid water damage at all costs, but there's just like this little maybe half an inch or inch area right at the corner of the slide. Like usually even if it's like aluminum siding, it's fiberglass in this area. And it seems like there's just always this little tiny gap where just, like you said, just a little bit of water, maybe it's just wicking in just little by little. But, that stuff adds up, 2, 3, 5, 10 years. Yeah. And before you know it, you have a rotten subfloor.
That camper that we went to Indiana to look at, that we asked the guy, it was a 2011, so it wasn't, too old, but
Yeah.
he said, oh no water damage, no soft spots, and so
There
we get
never
up,
is.
yeah,
Never.
we get up there and the camper's sitting way up on a hill and evidently hadn't used it for a couple of years. And he had pulled out all the slides, and first thing I always do is go to the front and I'll open all the cabinets and the closets and we feel around up there and we make sure we don't see any. Usually if there's any water damage, you can also see little rusty drop marks down the walls and things too. That's first, and then the bubbling starts. So it looked good. Go in the bathroom, we lift up the mattress, and all that front part looks good. And then we go into the main living room, and I'm lifting up the carpet off the slide out floor, checking the first corner, and it looks good. And then he was like, oh yeah, I did find one soft spot on the rear of that slide. So I walked back there and I pushed my foot on it, and I could have literally like put my whole fist through the floor. It was so rotten.
No.
Yeah, and there was a wall separating that from the bunk room, and so we start feeling the wall next to that slide, and it was rotten. So I went into the bunk room. That wall was rotten. The floor was rotten. Walked to the end of the bunk. It was rotten there. The back wall, I lifted up the curtain, and there was a hole in the wall, and you could see black mold growing in it. And
Oh my gosh.
and then I looked around the edge of the fascia, and that's where the mushroom was growing out of the side of it. And I was, we need to walk away.
Besides that, it was in good shape.
Yeah, it was great after that.
Yeah. The funny thing is the Phylon fiberglass was in excellent condition. So there was no delam on the Phylon at all.
Which is rare when you have that much
Yeah.
water damage.
Yeah.
And you guys have this picture posted, right? I know April showed it to me.
I think we put it in our stories. Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
because there literally is a full-grown mushroom growing out of this RV. It's ridiculous.
And he apparently didn't know anything about it.
Yeah. So at that point, when we talk to people like that, we try to educate them.
Right.
this is not easy fix. This is something that's going to require a lot of time, and we didn't want to invest that much time and money into fixing it. At that price point anyway.
And we tried to locate for him where the water was coming in so he could stop it. At that point, it was a little too far gone, but I said, just for your reference, this is what we think is happening.
Was he nice about it or in denial?
Yeah, he said he didn't know, and he may not have. So he was cordial. We just said, thanks for letting us look at it. Sorry to waste your time, but we're not interested.
When we pass on a camper, most of the time the people ask why, and I'll say, well, for a lot of families, if they're just looking to get a camper and have it for a couple of years, this one's probably going to serve their purpose. But for us, where we're going to be tearing things out and opening it up, here's these soft spots, and if we know about them, we want to fix them and make them right. And I just don't know if that's a project at least at certain price points that that we want to take on. And most people act like they have no clue, but the worst is, especially like in your guys' case where you're driving hours and hours and hours, when you get somewhere and somebody claims, that a unit is in immaculate condition, and then you find a mushroom growing out of the wall. That's got to drive you nuts.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
it happened right after that too with the next one we went and looked at. And we have found that some people will very strategically take pictures to not show things. The next guy that was down in Mississippi, we had that conversation with him. Said, listen, we just wasted a lot of time going to look at this. We just want to make sure that we don't run into the same thing. And
Right.
this one was even worse as far as
The outside was
The
completely
outside.
delammed.
you
It
couldn't
was-
tell
Oh,
in
no.
any of the pictures that it had an issue.
And we asked them, because I usually ask, there's a lot of questions that I ask when we're going to look, does it have any delamination? Most people don't know what that is. So I say bubbled spots on the Phylon. So water damage.
What's
which-
Phylon, Carrie?
The fiberglass, the fiberglass exterior. So,
You're using some big words here.
Yeah.
so and people, it's funny because we're on a lot of Facebook forums, and people will say, oh, that's from heat, or that's from this, or that's, and it's no, that's water damage. If you have a bubbled spot on the fiberglass, that's where water has seeped in and the backing from the fiberglass has come loose from the actual fiberglass. So that's what causes the bubble.
It's almost like cardboard that it's attached to. And when that gets wet, it starts, just curling up, which allows the separation and the bubbling on the outside. And once it starts doing that, it's very hard to repair. We've seen some kits and some adhesives that you can put a syringe in, but
it's not something that we want to tackle at
it's
this
not
point.
something. But
Well, and it still means there's an underlying issue. There's a
Yes.
reason that became
Yes.
delaminated.
absolutely.
But yeah, we've literally had sellers tell us, "Oh, it just came out of the factory like that with the bubble."
Hopefully not.
Yeah, there are certain spots like on our fifth wheel, the bulkhead, the part that goes under it, that you will see some bubbling under there just because there's nothing to glue it to. There's nothing to attach it to right there. So
A lot of times it's just the metal framing, and so they shoot screws into it, and you might have rippling there. That's not necessarily water damage. So
And that's the part that goes over the truck bed?
correct.
Like, so the underside, you might see that? Okay.
right.
Once you know what you're looking for, a lot of times if they show an exterior picture online,
Mhm.
you'll see it, when we're flipping through Marketplace or whatever, we'll be like, nope, nope.
Sometimes it just takes the right lighting, the right angle to see it. It may be minimal.
So when we got to Mississippi and we were looking at it, we were like, how did we miss this? And we always zoom in, the pictures and
It was extremely bad. I got out of the truck and my jaw dropped. I was like, what am I looking at?
Like you didn't even go inside.
Well, we did. I said, we've driven this far. Let's take a look at it. But I knew I wasn't going to buy it as soon as I saw it.
The guy, though, the owner, he'd only owned it for about a year and he bought it at a dealership and the dealership didn't tell him that was water damage. So honestly, I feel like he might not have known.
Well, it was so bad in the bedroom that it was causing a crack in the sidewall. I figured while we're here, we'll go ahead and look at everything. And I went up on the roof and I was kind of shocked how sturdy it was. I couldn't find rotten spots in the usual suspect corners along the lap seal or anything. And I was like, wow.
Does he do dangerous things a lot, Carrie? Does he put himself in?
Oh, he always goes on the roof.
I pretty much always want to check out the roof.
He sees an old rope bridge over a chasm and
Yes. Let's get a selfie over here, babe.
Yeah.
So I'm walking around the four corners and the sides, and I'm thinking, wow, this is crazy. How can you have that much water damage? And I'm not finding soft spots up here. And there was this huge pile of pine needles right in the center behind the air conditioner. And I walked by it twice, and I don't know what made me turn around, but I was like, what is under there? And I brushed it aside, and that whole section of the roof, you could have fallen through if you put your hand on it. I said, oh, there it is.
Hidden by the pine needles.
That's so strange that there's this pile right here. I feel
What
like
a coincidence.
I feel like he may have put that there just to hide it, but
Yeah. I try to think the best of people, but he was like, I don't know. We told him more than likely we're not going to buy it, but we did.
more than likely.
We did send the pictures to our clients. I was like, I'll send the pictures to our clients and see what they say, because at that point we were kind of getting desperate too, but
it's like not that desperate. There was that one in Kentucky too, that the whole inside ceiling was just sagging down, and she was in denial. She said there was nothing wrong with it, and the floor was rotten, the whole ceiling. I took one step on the roof and had to walk backwards. I was afraid I was
started
gonna go
cracking.
Are all roofs walkable? Like all units?
Not officially.
Because I always go on them, but then I wonder, are you supposed to be on all of these?
Well, we inquired with Keystone because a lot of customers would ask us that. As technicians, all of them were walkable, but there were some that made you feel like it could be compromising it. So we reached out to Keystone, and they told us that if it has a ladder installed from the factory, we consider it to be walkable.
Or if it's
or made to have one.
Right.
And so we kind of use that as a rule of thumb. And then I asked them, I said, so how are we supposed to maintain the roof if we're not allowed to walk on one? What's the guideline there? And they said that you should take sheet of plywood and lay it down so it spreads the weight over multiple roof trusses. So if you were going to work on, say, replacing an AC, or you had to work on some object that you couldn't reach from the side, they would recommend laying out plywood. So to answer your question, not all of them are technically supposed to be walked on.
I've been on some roofs where you can definitely feel like, okay, here was one roof panel, here's another roof panel. There's a little bit of like a little bit of movement. Is that an indication of damage to you, or is that would you chalk that up as natural?
A lot of them will flex under the weight of your steps. If you feel them flexing, it's good to try to find where those roof trusses are and stay on those. But if you step on it and you hear crunching and it feels very spongy, that would indicate to me there's probably some water damage. So if you can step on it and it's not crackling, crunching, it's just, flexing, that's generally normal, depending on the manufacturer. There's some that are so firm you can walk on no problem. You don't hear the first thing. And then there's some that, even from new factory standards, it has a lot of, just bounce to it, flex, a little bit of cracking if you step too hard, but it's going to be pretty noticeable if it's damaged. If you sit on it and it's just, it's very noticeable, in my opinion.
In your inspection process, so let's say you've identified that there isn't any, obvious water damage. What are you guys looking for next?
Appliances are a big one. We want to make sure all of them work. And if possible, it's not always, but we try to get them to turn the AC, the fridge, things like that on. So
check the water system, because if someone doesn't winterize it properly, then that can cause a lot of damage.
Yeah, the first camper we bought, it was the 2001 Dutchman travel trailer.
Our personal camper,
and
12 years ago.
Yeah, this is a long time. I didn't really know anything about any of that. It had roof leaks. It had hail damage. It had, I think the awning was messed up too, if I recall. But the water heater.
We loved it though, because prior to that, we were tent camping and rooming with our parents. So.
We were proud of it, but the water heater had not been winterized properly, and so when we got it, we were trying to use the water heater and nothing was happening. And I opened up the compartment where it was, and there's this gaping hole in the side of the tank. And I said, oh, well, there's our problem. Yeah. It had just been bypassed. And so we left it like that the whole time. We just used the bathhouse anywhere we went. And didn't
we could still use the water, just not hot water.
Yeah. So we had no hot.
They hadn't drained it. They hadn't pulled the plug, you would say. And then
the tank
ice expanded.
Yeah,
okay.
And it exploded. I mean, it was huge. But that's definitely something to look at. If you're in the north, so you probably are familiar with winterizations. We've had people from Florida that moved up to Tennessee that didn't know anything about winterizations because they never had to do it. And it's definitely something that you can mess up easily if you don't know what you're doing.
Toilet valve is usually the first thing to go. We sold a lot of toilet valves at the dealership, especially in March. People didn't winterize right, so the toilet valve would crack. Faucets crack. The city water inlets, if you don't push that in and get the antifreeze to come out, that will crack. Outside showers, people will forget about spraying that out.
And there's some people that will just blow the lines out, which I've heard some people are very successful. When we did it at the dealership, I don't know if the guys just weren't getting all of the water out, but it would still seem like the toilet valve would bust every time when they would do it that method. So we pretty much started having a rule that you have to use antifreeze when we're doing our winterizations. It's kind of a headache if you have something like that break that's in a hard to reach area. And I don't particularly like doing plumbing. It's probably one of my least favorite aspects of working on a camper.
He loves it when I change the double basin sinks out to single basins, and you got to replumb that drain, baby.
I know Derek's always like, are you sure you don't want to just leave the faucet in the sink that's in there?
They look so nice.
That's right. Yeah, but
he asked me on this one, how do you know they don't like double basin sinks? I I know.
Please ask them. No. I think worse than that, though, is when you have a problem with the black tank valves.
And where's that? Like where you pull to empty it?
Yeah, the actual valve that allows the tank to empty, it go into the pipes. When you have something down there break or freeze, and that's a chore that I always hated. But we had a saying at the dealership that you're not really a tech until you get somebody else's poo on you. So we worked on a lot of tanks there, and it was unpleasant.
Have you found a good method? One area that I always find fun is going between what is usually the 1/2-inch PEX tubing to I forget what the compression fitting is for like residential faucets.
3/8
Do you have a good method for that one?
We started using shark bite, so you can get it to where it slips on the PEX side, and then it has the 3/8 fitting on the other side. And as long as you have, we use the stainless braided hoses that connect to the sink and then connect to the shark bite.
Most of the faucets we buy come with those, so we only have to buy the shark bite, and it's about $10.
Yeah, that's actually been what made it easy. The first couple, I was scratching my head. I was like, I don't know how we're going to make this work. And then we started using the shark bites, and every one of them's been a breeze since then.
And they have a valve on them too, which is nice. So like if someone doesn't winterize properly and the faucet busts, we had that happen to us. Yeah. You just switch it, and then you can still use everything else in the camper. So
what are some other upgrades you guys have done to some of your renovations? Not necessarily like interiorly, but
like the systems.
Yeah.
Well, we usually always replace the old crank-up antennas with a King HD, digital antenna. Originally, we did it because I didn't want someone renting a camper and then driving down the road with the antenna up still. We did that a couple times on our personal camper. Usually you have people running through the campground chasing you. Hey, you got something up there, You
guys did a tankless water heater not too long ago, right?
Yeah. We did one in the Cougar. That was the first renovation, and they were going to be living in it full time. And they said, we love long, hot showers. Is there anything we can do? And so we talked to them about that, and they said, yes, that's definitely something we want. It took a little bit of extra effort to get it in there, but once we did, it worked out great. But the second installation we did was in the Jayco renovation, and that one was so easy because on the outside it was about eye level, so it was easy to get to. And then on the inside, it had its own cabinet. The door opened up, and you have full access to the back of it. That's about as simple as it's going to get, because you have plumbing, you have electric, and you have the LP systems. So sometimes getting to those can be a real challenge. And where they put some of those water heaters are extremely difficult to get into, whether it's under a fridge or behind a kitchen cabinet where you have multiple dividers. Sometimes it's under a bunk bed, or it could be anywhere, and just depends on the layout. So this was a dream come true, to be able to just open a cabinet, make all of my connections right there. So if you want to know a little bit about that installation process, what I start with is just disconnecting everything, and then cutting around the seal on the outside and pulling it out. And then kind of figuring out where the new connections need to be, because the water and the PEX, they're pretty firm where they're installed from the factory. And on the tankless, they are in a different spot. So I do have to usually cut those and I usually add the braided hoses back there too, just so you have flexibility.
And shark bites.
And the shark bites. So that helps with that connection. And then if your original water heater has electric heating elements, you want to disconnect the 110. So make sure the power's off, you disconnect that. And what I did in the Jayco was use that just to add a plug on the other side of the wall there.
It worked out great, because they wanted a plug for their coffee maker, and that was right there on the other side of the wall from the water heaters.
So you can repurpose that. Since it's on its own breaker, it's nice. But On the Cougar, I didn't really have a good spot for it, so I just disconnected it and left it in there in the cabinet. But you generally will have either an LP water heater or an LP and electric. So that's only going to be if you have the electric element. Now, you have the 12-volt side, which controls the board on the water heater. So you do tap into that. So depending on the model, you have to do a little research of knowing which wire does what when you hook up the new one. That's probably the trickiest part. It's just making sure you get that right. But it's generally not hard to find that model and figure out what wire does what. So you got, Suburban, you have the Atwood. So, I mean, there are a couple of variations there. But then the LP usually has the fairly stiff LP copper lining. You can generally just manipulate that to where it needs to hook up. It's not generally going to be too far from where it originally was. And then once you have that, you can kind of test fit it. On the Jayco, I had to add a wooden brace because the original water heater was larger than the Girard. And there's instructions that come with it of what you need to do for that. So
But you have to make sure you order the right door. So the Girards, the water heater itself is sold separately from the door for the outside. And the door for the outside is going to be different if you have an Atwood 6-gallon, 10-gallon, 12-gallon, or a Suburban 6-gallon, 10-gallon, 12-gallon. So make sure that you order the right door.
Yeah. So they sell that separately just for that reason, because there is a variety to choose from on that. Then the other thing that's a little different is that it has its own control panel that you can adjust the temperature, you can turn it on or off. And at the dealership, some of the people would want that exactly where the rest of all the switches are, so it would require actually routing the 12-volt wire. That can be a challenge just depending on where all of that is. In the Cougar, I installed it under their kitchen cabinet, but they also had it wired to a switch on the monitor panel, so they could turn it off in either, they could do it here or under the cabinet if they wanted. So it remained easy. They could just change the temperature if they wanted under the cabinet. But on the Jayco, I left it in that cabinet where the back of the water heater is. Easy access. So that's really up to the individual where they would want that, whether or not that's going to add to the install time. Personally, it's about that big. I don't really want that highly visible. In my opinion, it's better to just keep that hidden because it also has lights that stay on. So,
and then they can take as long as showers as they want.
Absolutely, yeah,
yes.
It's nice.
We're getting one this camping season.
About how much are those replacement units?
It's about $650, $700. It's funny because we've sold 3 campers to people that have never even camped before. And so they don't realize, that your hot water heater is 6 gallons. So they
don't know a military shower.
No, right. they don't know that you can't just get in there and take a 20-minute shower. 5 minutes in, your hot water's out.
Yeah.
So that's one thing. If you're going to be living in a camper, I would definitely recommend.
This is a upgrade that you could do to just about every RV.
I think so. I haven't run into one that would have any reason to suspect you couldn't, because they had to install the original, so there was obviously access. It may not be easy to get to. It may be a rather challenging install, but yeah, I think you could do it to just about anything. I know there are some different ones that you can install in addition to the one that's in there. I'm still kind of researching that, but
yeah, we've seen some that you hang, on next to the shower or something, and they're cheaper. But
there's also some that are in line with the plumbing, either before or after. I think it's before the original water heater. It kind of preheats it, but it keeps a flow going of hot water into it, so it doesn't have to work as hard. But it also gives you unlimited, and you can install that permanently somewhere.
You guys alluded to you're in the middle of a client build right now. Do you guys want to talk about that a little bit?
We were looking for that very specific RV, and we finally found it. So far, we're finished with the demo, and we're almost finished with the rebuild part. So,
Were there any surprises in the demo stage, or did you identify any issues?
There was a minimal.
Yeah, we did find one water damage spot that we missed. It's not bad. We're going to have to replace a section of wall panel about this big, so it's not bad. But we kind of expect that, even as thorough as we are. You know, if you're buying a camper, which most of the ones we seem to buy are 2010, 2013 range, you know, in our budget, we expect to find some water damage when we start ripping everything out.
Yeah, and there sometimes, like the Jayco that we bought, we did see some rippling in the front cabinets. It ended up being a little bit more severe than we expected, and at that time I don't think we had the moisture meter, but that one ended up being a little bit more extensive work than we had planned. But we could tell there was just a little bit, and by the time we got home, we took all the cabinets out and started taking the wall panels down. We pretty much had to rebuild the two front corners on that one. So sometimes there's surprises like that, you know, maybe we had an inkling that there would be something, but it
It was a little bit worse than we thought.
This one, we didn't have that kind of surprise,
No.
thankfully.
Yeah,
So
yeah, we were very pleasantly surprised when we ripped all the carpet up. Like,
Like, yes.
yes, yeah. So, this unit has the double slides in the bunk room. So we are dividing the bunk room in half. A little bit, bunk area is going to be a little bit bigger than a half, and so we've walled off an office space. So the one slide, when it comes in, it'll be the office space. And in order to do that, the AC vent was only on one side, so we had to add a ductwork, add another AC vent, built the wall. It's going to have a sliding pocket door that separates that. And in order for the pocket door to hit a wall, we had to move the door into the bunk area over 3.5 inches. So we had to add some 2x2s and cut the 2x2s on the other side, rebuild that. We rebuilt the whole entertainment wall. It had this weird built-in thing, and ripped that out, framed in for a fireplace. It also had the curved radius walls that a lot of campers have, and I didn't like that, so we squared that off. The client wanted, the bathroom had double sliding doors, one going into the bedroom and one going into the hallway. And in order to make that more private, they wanted to wall off the one that was going into the bedroom. So we removed that sliding door. That's actually the door we're using in the office, and walled that bathroom part up. The door, it didn't have a door going into the bedroom. It only had that accordion curtain. So we framed in to actually add a door, physical door on hinges going into the bedroom. And then the upper kitchen cabinets, it had that weird, has the L-shaped cabinets, countertops, and then it had the weird L-shaped cabinet up top that kind of like divides the room. And I didn't like that either. But the whole main control panel was in that upper cabinet.
Of course.
Yesterday we spent the day rebuilding that cabinet just to house the control panel, and then we're going to have open shelves above the sink. So we spent about a week rebuilding everything. We're almost to the part of prepping for paint and getting our primer on.
Sorry. I think this one is going to be the one she falls in love with when she's done, because it's more of her ability to design the space and be more creative, not just, you know, I'm going to decorate it like this, I'm going to paint it like this. This is more about what she's able to transform something into, which is, it's her real passion, I think. She's wanted to do that with the others, but the spaces were a little more limited.
And I call him sometimes the sayer of nay, because I'm like, this is what I'm going to do. You know,
like,
he
nope.
was like, no, we're not going to do that. I'm like, yes, we are.
No, I've come around to trusting your judgment on everything. So I think our relationship is developing before everyone's very eyes. So I try to temper her expectations, and she's the dreamer that puts them high. And and somehow we managed to find that medium that makes it work.
You keep pushing each other forward.
I think we're our own biggest supporters, so we mesh well in that regard. And she can visualize what she wants to do with the space. I'm one of those people that I want to see a picture of it first. I want to know how it's going to look before we make it look like that. And that's not possible in most of the renovations. So, she's got her ideas in her head, and she'll tell me something and it doesn't quite make sense to me because I'm not visualizing it the way she is. And then as things start to progress and she gets that plan in motion, I start seeing it come alive, and that's when I start getting excited about it. And it's like, let's get this done. This is nice. I like this.
So is the client involved in this design process with this one?
She likes my style and taste, so that's nice because this is the first one that we're doing for a client, so I was kind of nervous, but she likes the farmhouse, kind of modern farmhouse theme, which is what our first renovation was that I fell in love with. So I've been kind of just sending her the sinks and the paint colors and that kind of thing, and she's like, oh yes, love it. So I'm not as concerned that she's going to hate it because she seems to like everything that I've suggested.
Before we make any major changes, we do reach out to them and just make sure they're okay with the idea, and they've given some feedback on certain things that they like or dislike or request. One thing that they've asked us to do is go ahead and install the washer and dryer combo. So that's something we're going to be working on soon. So that's another upgrade that, if you have the capabilities in a layout to have, this one already has the hookups in.
Yeah, I forgot to mention
closet.
That was one of their requests, was washer dryer hookups. Yes. And so we were kind of looking at taking a unit that had a bath and a half and changing over the half bath to a laundry room.
I wasn't excited about that idea.
I was like, you can do it. We can do this. I know we can.
Yeah. So that's
sometimes we've had travel trailers for sale and they're like 25 feet long, and we'll get inquiries and people will be like, is there a washer and dryer in this?
No.
Yeah.
So what's next for Revamping Camping? You guys have this client build, and then did you say you have another client build coming up as well?
We do, yeah. Another customer, they bought a little Jayco. It's one of the ones that has a rear slide with a king bed in it. So it's a little 22-foot travel trailer, and then the king bed slides out of the back. And so her style is more gold and modern. And so that one will be probably a little bit harder for me because it's not something that I'm as into as that one. But I'm excited to try something different.
The other thing that the current renovation has going, it's a WeBoost.
Yeah.
It's a Wi-Fi booster, and we haven't installed one of those yet. So I'm kind of anxious to get my hands on this and try it out. But they are going to be working out of the camper on the road, so they wanted something to make sure that they had the proper signal for their equipment. And so he's got that ordered. He's sending it to us, and so you'll probably be seeing some pictures of that soon. But
yeah, that's actually a question that we get quite a bit, where people are asking how you boost the Wi-Fi.
So I will test this one out and we'll see how it goes.
Yeah, look for it on Instagram. It'll be trial and error for sure.
Posted.
And then just as kind of a general question about RV renovation, putting you on the spot, is there, what's the best tool that someone can have, or that you found, to have in your toolbox to use for renovation?
Well, we kind of disagree on this, but
I like tools. So like for me, most women like jewelry or shoes or makeup. I like tools. So it's too hard to pick one. But my favorite two tools probably that I use all the time, and I meant to bring them in here, is I have a side cutters. They're like a crescent plier, wire cutters for pulling staples, and then my pry bar, a little silver pry bar that's about this big, that I lost it for like a couple of weeks, and I went to Lowe's and bought a different brand, and I hated it, and then I found my silver one, and I was so happy. But
I use my impact for pretty much everything. So from demo, you're taking stuff apart. You have those little number 2 square bit screws everywhere. I use it constantly for that. If I'm fixing something, I'm using it to take something apart, put it back together. When we're building, I'm using it. So I've got so many hours with that in my hand. I'd say that's probably my most valuable tool.
Yeah. And then he had to buy me my own because we were constantly fighting over his.
Yeah. So when we started this, she didn't have a big collection of tools, and now she's probably got more than me. So
well, we had some, but they were not quality tools, you know. So like when you first get married and you're like, oh, I need a jigsaw. So we bought a $30 Black & Decker jigsaw, and you're trying to cut out 1-inch material to cut a sink out. Your little $30 Black & Decker jigsaw does not work very well. So
yeah, that is something that we have discovered, that sometimes it pays to have a higher quality tool to do the job because you get a better finished product. So we have started doing a little more research on the tools before we buy them.
I do love my table saw. I use my table saw probably every day. And before I had it, I just used my circular saw. And so I had to make a jig for cutting out shiplap. So I made a little jig that you would sit the circular saw and run it down, and it would cut, you know, straight even.
Just clamp it to the board and then run the saw in a straight
line.
line.
So it worked. I used it for the first 2 renovations, and it worked great, but
it's a little labor intensive.
It was very time consuming because you have to measure and clamp every 6 inches, you know, whereas a table saw, you set it to 6 inches and you just rip it through there.
Well, and I think too, that's just a good demonstration of, you know, you can do projects, you know, begin with what you have. And then as you get into this more, you get into any kind of, you know, DIY projects whatsoever, you kind of figure out, hey, there might be a better way to do this, and you can upgrade as you go along. But you shouldn't let like the obstacles of not being able to go out and buy $4,000 worth of, you know, tools kind of stand in your way and trying to do something.
When we decided, okay, we're going to do this as a business, then it's like, okay, our time is worth more money than the time it's taking us to do this. So
we've invested in a lot of tools in the last 12, 18 months. And April reminds me of this. So.
I have to talk him into it.
But like you said, like, you know, I had, you know, kind of those cheap tools for a whole lot of years. And I even knew when I was doing some, you know, the projects we do around the house or whatever, I'd always be saying, gosh, I know this would be so much easier, you know, if I just had a table saw or, you know, what it is. And now it's nice to experience that.
Yeah. It's definitely nice to have the right tool when you need it.
Guys, this has been amazing. I feel like we could keep talking and talking and talking. You guys are such a wealth of information. You know, we definitely got to try to do this again at some point, because I feel like we did not even scratch the surface with the amount of things you knew. I had probably 18 follow-up questions to everything you were saying, but I knew that I knew in the interest of time, I had to pull back the reins. So
write them down.
Yeah. No, and you know, we enjoyed following you guys and look forward to you guys sharing, you know, more of this information and these upgrades, because you guys know a lot of things that a lot of people who are doing this, you know, just they haven't experienced because, you know, they didn't have that background like you do of, you know, being on the dealership end or the service end. And, you know, that's just a wealth of knowledge there. So we appreciate your time.
Well, we're happy to share. You know, one thing that we appreciate is, you know, obviously we didn't know what we were doing when we started, and we had to learn on the go by making mistakes. We learned from other people. And that's one thing about this community that we love, is people are willing to share that knowledge. It's not top secret, you know.
Right.
Everybody's got a different experience too. So, you know, we love networking with people and learning different things, and we love to share it too. So, you know, we're willing to answer questions. We're willing to, you know, impart what knowledge we have, even if it's, you know, limited to our experience. But no, it's great. I love what you're doing, you know, being able to give a platform to that for people.
Thank you. Well, if people want to reach out to you guys at Revamping Camping, where can they find you?
Instagram at Revamping Camping. We're on Facebook as well. And then we have a website, revampingcamping.com.
Well, thanks again, guys. And we look forward to hopefully talking to you again soon.
Bye, guys.
Thank you.